In the spring of 2012, Jordan Mechner opened a carton his father had pulled from the back of a closet. Under a coat of dust, wedged between stacks of still shrink-wrapped copies of a game that had kept selling for more than 2 decades, sat 3 small 3.5-inch disc boxes. One was labeled, in his own handwriting, Prince of Persia Source Code, Original. He had spent 10 years believing this was gone, and he had no idea yet whether the data on those discs could still be read. The game itself came through fine, and that is the strange part. Prince of Persia, shipped in 1989, published by Broderbund, and it became one of those titles that just keeps selling, ported to platform after platform, remade, franchised, alive for decades. The year those discs turned up, it was still a game you could go out and buy. What had gone missing was the thing underneath it, the original source code, the actual 6502 assembly language Mechner had written on an Apple II across the late 1980s. Every instruction, every routine, the raw, human-written material a finished game is assembled from. The product was everywhere. The original blueprint it grew out of had dropped out of reach. And a finished game does not simply hand its source back. You can pick apart a compiled game and reconstruct something like the code up to a point, but you cannot recover the exact original document, the specific way one person actually solved the problem in his own hand with his own comments. Once those original discs went missing, that specific object was gone from anywhere Mechner could find it. That is what was sitting, unread, in a dusty box. No one deliberately erased it. And that is exactly how so much digital history goes missing, quietly, through nothing more dramatic than a box getting shoved to the back of a shelf. Mechner's search really began around 2002, when a new Prince of Persia game wanted the old code for an Easter egg and he realized he could not lay hands on it. From there, he looked on and off for something like 10 years. He went back to former Broderbund colleagues, asked them to dig through their own archives, chased down every lead he could think of. Nothing surfaced, and after a decade of dead ends, he did the reasonable thing and concluded the original source was gone for good. He was not a man with no record of his own work. He still had development material, design notes, documentation, the journals he had kept through those years. What he had lost was the one piece that could not be rebuilt from memory or notes, the original code itself, and the actual discs it lived on. The break, when it came, was almost embarrassingly ordinary. Mechner's father was clearing out a closet in New York and came across a carton of his son's old things. He put it in the mail. Inside was a small time capsule, old cassettes of Mechner's earlier games, odds and ends from a career, and those 3 3.5-inch disc boxes, Apple ProDOS format, hand-labeled as the original Prince of Persia source. The detail that makes the whole thing almost too neat is where they were. Not in a vault. They were tucked in among piles of still shrink-wrapped European copies of the finished famous game. The product he had sold and resold for decades had been sitting right up against its own missing source the entire time. For 10 years, he had been asking other people to search their archives, and it had been in his own father's closet. The find made news, and here the story could have ended, happily and tidily, except finding the discs was not the same as reading them, and that is where the real work started. Because a 22-year-old disc is not something you can just plug in. 2 problems stood in the way, and a third hung over everything. The first was that nothing on a modern desk could read these on its own. No current laptop has a 3.5-inch Apple drive. The format was decades dead. Reading a ProDOS disk from 1989 meant assembling a working chain of the right hardware, some of it vintage, some of it modern preservation gear, and knowing how to make the 2 ends talk to each other. That is not a plug and a cable, that is expertise. The second was the state of the media itself. A floppy disk stores data as tiny patterns of magnetism on a thin coating, and over decades, magnetism can fade. A disk written perfectly in 1989 might, by 2012, have quietly decayed into noise, and you cannot tell by looking. Nobody knew, going in, what these particular disks had become. And hanging over both was the physical risk. Careless handling can turn a recoverable disk into a lost one, and with media this old, there's not always a second chance. The people who made it happen were not the company that owns the franchise, and not the Internet Archive arriving as an institution. They were, at the core, 2 individuals with exactly the right unglamorous expertise, plus Mechner himself, and a wider circle of helpers. The first was Tony Diaz, an Apple II collector, one of those people who keeps vintage machines alive and running, rather than parked on a shelf. Diaz drove up roughly 80 miles from Oceanside with a car full of the past. Vintage Apple computers, drives and cables, the obsolete hardware you need to spin a 1989 ProDOS disk and have something on the other end understand it. The second was Jason Scott, an archivist with the Internet Archive, who specializes in exactly this, pulling data off aging media before it is too late. He brought preservation-grade imaging hardware, reported as a cryoflux, the kind of device built to capture the raw magnetic flux off a disk's surface and reconstruct the data from that. Around them, others helped, in the room and remotely, and Mechner was right there verifying what came off. This was a small collaboration, several people with different pieces of the puzzle, and it was slow. By Mechner's own account, the extraction ran through most of a long day and night, hours of patient, careful work that he later said would have taken far longer without Diaz's know-how, his stubbornness, and that well-kept collection of old hardware. The source turned out to be spread across several floppies, so recovering it meant reading an archive off disk after disk and piecing it back together. A room full of people, coaxing decades-old data back into the light while everyone waited. That is what saving digital history actually looks like. Before they started, Mechner said he had a good feeling about it, and then the reads began. It did not all come good at once. By the accounts of the people in the room, a first readable backup set did not yield usable data, and it was a second set that finally restored correctly. When that one came through, the decades-old 6502 assembly resolved into clean, readable text, code written in the 1980s on hardware most people had long forgotten, appearing in front of the man who had typed it. Of that decisive read, the word from the room was blunt. No errors. Not a corrupted, half-salvaged fragment, but the real thing. Mechner's reaction was relief, and he put a number on it. This, he said, was 99% of what they had hoped for. He meant that as a measure of how much of the dream had come true, not a forensic completeness score, and the feeling behind it was real because he knew the other branch. If the discs had come back unreadable, he said, they would have been crushed, and it would have been lost for good. That outcome was never off the table going in. He had already spent a decade living in the version where it was gone. Someone asked him when he planned to release the code. His answer, by the same account, was one word: tonight. And he did. Not days later, but during that same long session, the code went up to a public GitHub repository created in April 2012 where anyone in the world could copy it. He had just learned, in the most visceral way possible, the actual law of digital preservation. A thing that exists in exactly one place is a thing that can vanish. Those disks had been vulnerable precisely because, as far as anyone knew, they were the only copy left. The cure for a single copy is many copies, in many hands, beyond the reach of any one closet or drawer. He was careful about what he was, and was not giving away. Releasing the source, he made clear, handed over no rights in the Prince of Persia franchise. That belongs to Ubisoft, and Ubisoft alone makes and sells Prince of Persia games. What he was releasing was the historical artifact, the 6502 assembly, assembled with a tool called Merlin, along with supporting routines and the old documentation. Study it, take it apart, tinker with it. All of that was welcome. This was source made public, not a standard open source license, and the franchise itself was never on the table. You can measure the save by what came after. Diaz and Scott took the story on stage at Kansas Fest 2012, the annual gathering of Apple II diehards, under a title that says it plainly, Prince of Persia, source code, saved. Once the code was public, people could actually work with it. The programmer Fabien Sanglar published a detailed read-through of how the game worked under the hood. Others studied it, forked it, and picked it apart. The blueprint was back in circulation, and later, his papers and materials found a more deliberate home, donated to the Strong Museum of Play, moving from an accidental closet to a public repository to actual institutional care. There is a quieter line in the record now, too. Mechner's repository today thanks the late Tony Diaz, the collector who drove up from Oceanside with his crates of vintage hardware. In 2012, he was alive, expert, and stubborn enough to spend most of a night bringing that data back. The rescue happened, while the collector whose know-how it leaned on was still alive to give it, and that is the real reason to tell this, more than a famous game brushing an edge. Underneath every finished, polished, still-selling thing is an original that can slip to the back of a closet and quietly rot, and whether it survives can come down to whether the right people show up with the right old hardware and the right knowledge before it is gone. Mechner's, in the end, came back readable, He got lucky, and he knew it, which is exactly why he made sure its survival would never again hang on one fragile copy in one closet. The next artifact in the next closet does not start with a repository and a museum already waiting for it.